Poverty is not a natural state in Congo. It is engineered, a design crafted by colonial plunder and sustained by modern global systems, tapping from that particular stuff. Imagine if the $24 trillion worth of minerals buried in Congo soil were beneath New York or London. Would the world tolerate children crawling into mines for $1 a day? Would foreign companies, own 80% of that wealth while local people remain desperately poor? Just imagine it and answer for yourself. The answer is no, no. We would call it, emergency. We would call it a crime against humanity. We would call it a whole lot of other stuff. But because it's Congo, the world remains, silent, diplomatic, spineless. This is not a Congolese crisis. It is a global hypocrisy. But breaking this cycle requires more than courage. It requires courage. Courage to demand transparency, to demand and to hold companies accountable, to refuse to buy products built on big-time exploitation. Because every purchase is a vote, a kind of a vote. I do this and I want it to be. Every silence ought to be seen as a consent, and every action, no matter how small, should be seen as a step towards injustice, towards we not really wanting to be really, really responsible, we not wanting to hold ourselves accountable and hold ourselves clean and hold ourselves dear. For whenever the harsh truth about Congo breaks into international headlines, usually after a mine collapse or a viral documentary, same excuses roll out over and over again. It is not Apple's fault. It is not Elon Musk's fault. It is not the West's fault. It is the Congolese government's fault. It is corruption. It is poverty. It is Africa. Yada, 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 yada. But let me be clear, these are not answers. They are evasions, careful distractions, designed to diffuse responsibility until it disappears altogether. Don't talk about it, just be quiet. And so, yes, the Congolese government struggles with corruption and internal conflicts. Yes, there are local challenges, but corruption is not the root cause. It is a symptom of, centuries of economic sabotage. Every day you carry a device, maybe a phone, a laptop, or even a smartwatch. These are symbols of progress, convenience, and innovation. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what is the real cost behind these sleek gadgets? The answer lies deep beneath the surface, in the soil of the Democratic Republic of Congo, otherwise called the DRC. At the heart of your device is a mineral called cobalt. It powers lithium-ion batteries that keep your phone charged and your world connected. But here's the hard truth. About 70% of the world's cobalt comes from Congo, specifically the Katanga region in the southeast of DRC. This mineral, for many persons, is beyond a resource. For millions of Congolese families, it is a cost. Many families depend on small-scale mining, called artisanal mining, to get to survive, but this work is anything but simple or safe. Children as young as 6 crawl into narrow, dangerous tunnels without helmet or gloves. They dig in toxic dust and carry heavy sacks, risking lung damage and deadly accidents, all for less than $2 a day. Put simply, your phone is powered by children digging with their bare hands. This is the hidden price of progress. But even if not for children, even though it was not children who were the ones doing this, even though adults were just the only persons sent out there to get to do this, you think about it. Think about the cost of human dignity just to give us the things we get to get, and we're going to get that we're going to get to that particular place in a very, very short period of time. How many persons get to see themselves go down, diminished, and and find themselves missing out on life and missing out on a whole lot of things, And so while the world, gets to celebrate how connected we all are, what connects us here is pain, silence, and exploitation. For the smooth scrolling on your screen hides blistered fingers and bent bodies. Cobalt is just a mineral to the world, but to these children, to these people, it's a sentence of hardship, illness, and an early death. There are no headlines about this, no viral hashtags, no tech conferences that pause to honor the children behind your battery. Instead, the world keeps buying, upgrading, and scrolling. And these children, these men, they keep digging. The world knows, it chooses to just get to look away. It looks away because it's in Africa. This is where the story of Congo begins, not with numbers or vague promises, but with truth, moral truth. We live in a world powered by suffering. Our cleanest technologies are built on the dirtiest truths. Progress hasn't figured out how to include justice in its prices, and so we continue. This isn't just about guilt, it is about recognition. There's blood in your pocket, there's blood in that money, a grave beneath your glass screen, and it's time to stop being silent. Let the world scroll slower, if only to listen to the children screaming beneath it. Let the world look beyond itself. Let the world look at itself and introspect and see what it hasn't done right, and let it begin to do the right thing. Let the world start doing the right thing. Let it start to do what it ought to do and when it ought to do them, and do them rightly also, because that's the only way we make progress. But to truly understand why the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to bleed today, we need to look far beyond the present moment. We must travel back in time, more than a century ago, to the violent origins that still shape the lives of millions. This history is not a distant relic. It is in the foundation of today's crisis. For before cobalt powered the lithium-ion batteries on your phone, on my phone, before tech billionaires and venture capitalists dominated global markets, there was something much darker at work: colonial greed and brutality. And to grasp Congo's modern suffering, we must confront the man who set the stage, the Belgian king, King Leopold II. In 1885, European powers convened at the Berlin Conference to carve Africa into pieces. With zero input from any African leaders, the Congo, one of the richest and most resource-abundant lands on the continent, was handed over as a personal possession to King Leopold II, not to Belgium as a nation, but to him as an individual monarch. It became known as the Congo Free State, but this was a cruel irony. The people were anything but free. Leopold's regime became one of the most brutal and exploitative colonial enterprises in modern history. His agents established a system of forced labor to supply Europe's demand for rubber, a key material for the Industrial Revolution, used in everything from bicycle tires to machinery belts. And so villages were required to meet rubber quotas or face horrific consequences. Those who failed were punished by imprisonment, torture, or death. Soldiers under Leopold's command carried out atrocities with chilling efficacy, to prove that bullets were not wasted. They chopped off the hands of, workers and villagers. Entire communities were devastated, families were torn apart, the forest ran red with blood, and so the story goes, The human toll was staggering, Conservative estimates place the death count at around 10 million Congolese people, a figure so large it's almost incomprehensible. To put it in perspective, this loss exceeds the number of deaths in both World War II combined. These deaths were not accidental or collateral damage. They were a systematic campaign to crush resistance and maximize profit. For Leopold, Congo was a personal enterprise built on suffering and suffering alone. Today, it is easy to label this as colonial history, something belonging to the past. But the truth is this history is alive, it echoes through the present, and we see it everywhere. The legacy of exploitation and violence didn't end when Leopold's regime was replaced by Belgian colonial rule in 1908. It evolved. The Congo remained the source of world destruction, with foreign powers and corporations profiting from its minerals and labor, while its people were left impoverished. Small Belgium. So when the world shifted its demand from rubber to other minerals, copper, uranium, diamond, the cycle repeated. Now cobalt dominates that particular global market, but the pattern remains the same to a large extent. We no longer see chains and whips. Instead, there are contracts, multinational corporations, and complex supply chains. Yet the fundamental injustice gets to remain. Congo's riches flow outward, while its people remain trapped in poverty. This ongoing extraction without restitution fuels conflict, fuels corruption, and political instability. Foreign companies often control the majority of mining operation in this region, repatriating profits abroad. The Congolese government, weakened by decades of interference and war, struggles to regulate and redistribute this wealth. Meanwhile, local communities bear the brunt and the cost. Polluted rivers, devastated lands, health crises, and economic exclusion. And this is, like I said, not by accident. It is the result of centuries of economic sabotage and political manipulation. And we'll see that in a bit. The current Congo crisis is not chaos, it is history, unpunished and unacknowledged. For when generations of people are robbed of their resources and then blamed for their poverty and conflict, that is not misfortune. It is a crime. It is a crime against them. And this crime continues today under different guises. The term mineral crisis obscures the real issue. It suggests that, violence is inherent or spontaneous. In reality, it is fueled by global demand and the networks that profit from such. And so when the media outlet talks about instability or fragile states, they erase the structural violence at play here. Leopold's ghost lingers in the systems and attitudes that allow Congo's suffering to be ignored or dismissed. What is most troubling is how this legacy allows modern actors to wash their hands of responsibility. Boardrooms in London, New York, and Beijing may be far from the mines, but the wealth they accumulate is built on the backs of those who dig under unsafe conditions without protections or fair wages. This system is supported by global consumers who unknowingly fuel the demand. Consumers like you and I, It is this cycle of extraction and exploitation designed to keep Congo poor and powerless while others profit that gets to disturb me a whole lot. And so to break this cycle, we must tell the full story, not just of cobalt or child labor, but of the centuries-long legacy of exploitation and the systems that enable such. We must recognize that Congo's current pain is not random. It is the product of deliberate policies and global indifference born out of evil. We owe Congo more than minerals. We owe Congo an apology. We owe Congo the fact that we need to acknowledge their truth. We owe them at least justice. And this is not what we are ready to do at the moment. This is not what we as a people want to look at. We don't want to look at the whole conversation as it concerns what ought to be done, what ought not to be done, what Leopold did, what Leopold didn't do, what America does down there, the contribution it had to the Manhattan Project and all of those type of conversations. We don't want any of that. We don't want anybody to get to remind us of the brutal history that still shapes lives and landscapes We don't want to talk about the fact that this particular situation in Congo was not something that happened like 700,000 years ago. It's something that happened here, something that happened very, very close to us down here. As early as 1885, these conversations happened. The crisscrossed and boycotted and shared and divided and shoved the continent of Africa into different stuff. And we're still suffering, and Congo needed to stay intentionally and perpetually that way. And recently Trump just talked about settling a deal between Congo and Rwanda, and in return America gets mineral deals. It's always about mineral deals and all that, not as if they care. But what do you have us do? They've never been about peace. They've always been about extraction, about profit, about business. And so the story goes, Nobody is punished, nobody is accused of whatever they did. People just get to die. And don't forget, it was in this same Congo that Patrice Lumumba was killed for daring to tell the Belgians what ordinarily should be done, what must be done. And eyewitnesses to such get to talk about the gruesome nature of the events that happened down there. We must look at a whole lot of stuff. We must not fail to continue to look at eyewitness accounts from survivors, pain and all that. One survivor is recounted by the historian Adam Hochschild in King Leopold's Ghost, described the daily terror. We lived in fear of the soldiers who could arrive at any moment, cutting off hands to meet quarters. There was no justice, only death. The death toll estimated down there is, it's a figure. It's a crazy figure. I cannot even imagine. I couldn't even imagine what happened down there in Congo. It's a lot. The horror did not end with that particular regime. The horror continued. It's here with us, and we must know what we need to do with the particular situation, and there must be an apology. We must go back to look for Lumumba and look for how he was killed, and look for things beyond a whole lot of crazy things we think about. Despite vast mineral wealth, the Congolese people remain some of the poorest in the world, with little benefits from this particular stuff. This paradox is at the heart of Congo's tragedy. Today the chains of colonialism have transformed, but it has not vanished. There are contracts, there are a whole lot of other stuff done, as said earlier, but there seems not to be any change. There seems not to be any improvement, and the media cannot lay claims of not knowing what's happening. The media is complacent down here. The media is also guilty of the events and the things happening down here. The media has to be held to account and held to good account. Many bodies have spoken up and spoken out about different events and different suggestions and different ways to go. But who listens? Who gets to listen as to the conditions, of the families living near the mines? Who get to describe how children as young as 7 worked in pits, exposing themselves to toxic chemicals without protective gears and all that. And you see the idea of probably a son goes to the mine because such a family has nothing, and then they need the money to keep themselves alive, But the consequences of this exploitation extend beyond the mines. Decades of interference and conflict gets to also fuel, a whole lot of other issues. And so Congo has been left politically fragile and economically dependent. The persistent poverty of resource-rich countries like Congo is often the result of poor governance, exacerbated by external forces tied all to the external legacy of colonialism, born out of corruption and all that. This crisis is chaos, and chaos it must be called. It is a direct outcome of centuries of unpunished injustice. For when generations are robbed of all what they got, and they are now blamed for their suffering and their pain, there's something that we need to tell ourselves in the brain, that we've forgotten who we are, we've forgotten our senses, we've forgotten ourselves. We've forgotten how we ought to be and how we ought to grow and how we ought not to go. And so we find ourselves here. When faced, in fact, with the reality of this situation, sometimes you can be left helpless. The media talks about different crazy things I don't even understand. You don't even know there's a problem going on in Congo. You don't even know there are problems down there. You don't know that Leopold's ghost continues to linger down here, and the system that tries to keep Congo in poverty continues to keep it in poverty. And so modern corporation may not wield whips, but their boardroom decides the fate of millions. Consumers around the world, like you and I, get to decide what is done and what is not done. From our purchases and all that, we require to tell the full story of these people and how their life gets to go down there. We owe them, as I said before, and I say it again, we owe them truth, we owe them solidarity, we owe them the fact that this could have been us. And we ought to end the modern day slavery in the backyard of Silicon Valley. Another theme of slavery, it is always thought of as a relic of the past, chains, plantations, forced labor under whip and gun. But this has changed, It simply moved, it changed shape, and it's now taking new forms. Today's slavery is not always visible. It hides beneath the gleaming surface of your smartphone screens, beneath the shiny advertisement for clean energy and innovation. The new slaves may wear school shoes too small for their feet, carry babies on their backs, or dig through dark tunnels for what is far beneath their reach, all in the world for us to enjoy uninterrupted connection. And in 2023, something extraordinary happened. Families from Congo took a stand. They sued some of the world's biggest tech giants, from Apple to Google to Dell to Microsoft, Tesla, in a US court. Their case, these companies knowingly profited from child labor and deadly working conditions in Congo's cobalt mines. The stories these families told were heartbreaking, boys buried alive under collapsing tunnels, girls with crushed limbs, children walking in toxic dust without helmet or safety equipment. One plaintiff, you can imagine, might talk about the son who was severely injured in a mine collapse, speaking about the pain. You can hear her voice even without hearing her talk. You can hear what it takes to ordinarily be a mother. But in March 2024, the US Appeals Court dismissed their case. The ruling, tech companies were not held directly responsible. Buying cobalt from suppliers who use child labor was not enough to prove aiding and abetting forced labor. Their legal decision is a glaring example of the banality of evil in our time. Not soldiers wielding weapons, but corporate lawyers drafting contracts, CEOs smiling for shareholders, PR departments spinning narratives. Meanwhile, children continue to die on the ground. Men also. This is not a malfunction of the system. It is the system itself. It is the exact system. Corporate complicity in forced labor is not accidental or unintended. It is woven into the fabric of global capitalism, and that's the truth. This complicity has enabled us everywhere, especially us, you and I. Because as consumers, we keep upgrading, we worship innovation, often ignoring the human side of it and all that. We praise clean energy, and smart technology, but if our batteries depend on the blood and sweat of child miners, then our clean energy is only clean from afar. This is the problem down here. It is not born out of ignorance. It is a problem of cowardice and a collective refusal to demand accountability of ourselves and all that. And this silence allows multinational corporations to profit without consequences and without looking at things themselves. But the families who sued weren't asking for the impossible. They sought justice, dignity, recognition, that their children's lives mattered. If that is too much to ask, then what does it mean to be civilized? For the modern world has, perfected the art of turning a blind eye, and that saddens me. This slavery, can also come in other means, hidden in supply chains, justified by distance and complexity, and not even stepping foot down there. But breaking this cycle requires more than courage. It requires courage. Courage to demand transparency, to demand and to hold companies accountable, to refuse to buy products built on big-time exploitation. Because every purchase is a vote, a kind of a vote. I do this and I want it to be. Every silence ought to be seen as a consent, and every action, no matter how small, should be seen as a step towards injustice, towards we not really wanting to be really, really responsible, we not wanting to hold ourselves accountable and hold ourselves clean and hold ourselves dear. For whenever the harsh truth about Congo breaks into international headlines, usually after a mine collapse or a viral documentary, the same excuses roll out over and over again. It is not Apple's fault. It is not Elon Musk's fault. It is not the West's fault. It is the Congolese government's fault. It is corruption. It is poverty. It is Africa. Yada, 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 yada. But let me be clear, these are not answers. They are evasions, careful distractions, designed to diffuse responsibility until it disappears altogether. Don't talk about it, just be quiet. And so, yes, the Congolese government struggles with corruption and internal conflicts. Yes, there are local challenges, but corruption is not the root cause. It is a symptom of, centuries of economic sabotage. Poverty is not a natural state in Congo. It is engineered, a design crafted by colonial plunder and sustained by modern global systems, tapping from that particular stuff. Imagine if the $24 trillion worth of minerals buried in Congo's soil were beneath New York or London. Would the world tolerate children crawling into mines for $1 a day? Would foreign companies, own 80% of that wealth while local people remain desperately poor? Just imagine it and answer for yourself. The answer is no, no. We would call it, emergency, we would call it a crime against humanity, we would call it a whole lot of other stuff. But because it's Congo, the world remains, silent, diplomatic, spineless. This is not a Congolese crisis. It is a global hypocrisy. Consider this, the United Nations preaches human rights, yet member states enrich corporations that violate them. Western governments, pledge billions for climate change, but rely on Congo's cobalt mined in unsafe conditions. What a jeopardy down here. Media outlets provide minute-by-minute coverage of Wall Street, but rarely investigate why a mother in Congo must send her 10-year-old child into a mine. This silence is intentional. It is not born out of ignorance. It is a willful blindness. We have normalized injustice and euphemisms, emerging markets, growth sector, supply chains. Behind these words lies a brutal truth. Africa suffers so that the rest of the world, can thrive. And it's sickening. This remains the colonial playbook. All over again. Export the pain, import the profit. Export the pain, import the profit. But then, who is responsible? Everyone who knows and says nothing. Everyone who profits and pretends not to see. Everyone who refuses to ask, is this just? For silence is not neutral. Silence is consent. And as long as we pretend this system is too big to change, too complex to fix, we become complicit in the exploitation, and so it goes. We don't need more reports. We need more courage. We must stop shifting blame and start, naming power. Start naming things. The problem is not Africa. The problem is how the world treats Africa, and the problem is how Africa treats herself. The problem is how our leaders go on corrupt and stupid and ignorant and naive and uneducated. But feeling outraged is not enough, Feeling guilty is not enough. The question we must ask is, what can be done? More importantly, what must be done? And the truth is that such vast injustice survive because many believe, they are powerless. They think their voice, their purchase, their curiosity, even their scream does not matter. Sound your gong. That lie fuels the system. It's not true. You are not powerless. You are part of this global structure. And because of that, you have the power to weaken it, to interrupt it, to change its terms. If I should offer 4 cents to demand this, we can look at how this can bring about justice. We can look at, the sense of corporate accountability. The blood flows first through corporations. They are the first people to look at, through the executive, investors, and managers who sign contracts and look away. Tech companies must be held accountable, not with vague promises or PRO companies, but with full, transparent responsibility. They must audit their supply chain publicly and independently. They must name their suppliers and sever ties with mines that use child labor or exploitation. And they must be forced by law, by markets, and by public pressure to pay into the rehabilitation of the communities they have exploited. It's a must. Because if your fingerprints can unlock your phone, your cobalt should be traceable to the child who dug it, to the village that dug it, On the second hand, legal pressure must be with teeth. International law cannot be toothless. If courts can, pursue war criminals in remote jungles, they should be able to, prosecute CEOs who profit from, forced labor, even if it happens across the ocean and all that. For right now, companies hide behind distance and bureaucracy, and for as long as abuse is outsourced, it remains legal. That must end. Justice cannot only apply where the light shines, it must reach where the blood is buried. Otherwise, justice is just another colonial lie. What about investment in people, not just minerals? For the Congolese do not need endless extraction. They need schools, they need hospitals, they need clean water, they need infrastructure and protection. They must benefit from the wealth beneath their feet first. Companies that profit billions from Congo must be required to build and invest, not just mine, fair wages, local economies, long-term development. This is what true resource justice looks like, not whatever we are doing. Because trade without fairness is theft. For if the international community truly believes in human rights, it must put its money where treaties are, which brings us back to we conscious consumers and loud citizens, And here's the most personal demand. You the buyer, the student, the voter, the tech enthusiast, the listener of this podcast, you matter. You matter. You can ask hard questions, demand ethical sourcing, organize boycott, spread awareness, do a whole lot of stuff. Resist the lie that your choices don't matter. It's not true. They do matter. They do matter. Every purchase, as I've said, is a vote. Every silence is a consent and an approval. Every small action is a crack in the wall of injustice. We will not fix this overnight, but we must begin by rejecting helplessness. Congo is not poor. Congo is pillaged. Congo is a whole lot of other things, and we either part of the pillaging or we are part of the refuser. And as Congo goes, so does Sudan. So does a whole lot of other parts of Africa. And so while the world's attention is caught by headlines about Ukraine, Gaza, and Taiwan, another country is being torn apart in near silence. Its people are displaced, its children scattered, its land soaked in blood. But you rarely hear about it in the news or social media feeds. That country, as Congo, is Sudan. Since April 2023, Sudan has spiraled into one of the worst humanitarian disasters of our time, a brutal civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid response forces. These two have been fighting for a very long time, and so cities have been bombed, villages razed, and over 9 million people displaced, the largest internal displacement crisis in the world, surpassing even Syria. According to the UN Refugee Agency, Sudan is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis with millions forced to flee their homes, facing hunger, disease, and violence every day. Yet the world's response has been muted. The media coverage is so bad. Where are the emergency summits? Where are the mass protests? Where are the journalists risking everything to report from the ground? The silence is deafening. It's so deafening. I cannot tell you why. But then I still have to ask you why, as you're asking me why. It is because Sudan does not supply cobalt to a large extent. It does not power your phone. It doesn't stock Tesla's batteries or fuel Wall Street's pocket. It doesn't give them what they really need. But it also gives them a whole lot of other things. Sudan has oil and gold, yes, but not enough to shake global market as many persons want to believe, but that's not true. Sudan has a whole lot. It has a whole lot, and so the world watches silently, or worse, turns away completely. But remember, this silence is not an accident. It's a habit. It's a serious habit. It was kept that way to deepen the whole difficulties. It was born out of racial biases and all that. And one thing you should take away from here is that Africa doesn't produce weapons of mass destruction, which is a good thing. South Africa gave up its nuclear dreams and all of that just for peace to get to reign, and conversations even about like that. You look through history, you see almost the lack of African countries going into the whole idea of colonizing others. But you cannot say that completely of the West, which is also a thing that stands in contrast to what they claim to be, this bunch of civilized people and others barbaric, as to how Hegel will talk about the evolution and the history of the world in his phenomenology of spirit. And so the whole story continues. The whole story continues. For when African nations, descend into conflict, they are labeled fragile states, tribal zones, or failed regions. Their people are reduced to numbers. They are suffering, treated as inevitable. But Sudan is not fragile. Sudan is not broken. Sudan is under siege, not only from warring factions, but from global indifference and from global interest also. This indifference links Sudan to Congo. Two different crises, two different wars, but the same result. African bloodshed in silence, African grief ignored. Sudan is Congo, told with a different script. And the world's response reveals the painful truth. If you don't produce minerals that power modern technology, your crises do not echo. And even if you do, it still becomes a problem. If your blood does not feed the global economy, your genocide is buried beneath trending topics, and that's what still happens. The injustice down here is born out of hierarchical suffering. Some deaths are unbearable, mourned with vigils and sanctions. Others are expected. They are met with silence. And so African suffering does not move the world because The world does not believe African lives matter equally. And that must change. From Winston Churchill and his sense of hypocrisy and all that, things must change, not with empty compassion. Because every time we are silent about Sudan, every time we pretend it's too complicated or too far away, we participate in history's long pattern of turning away from Africa. But not today, not here, not now. We ought to do what we ought to do. We ought to do what we ought to do right. For let's be honest, you are not outside this story. You are not watching from a distance. You are part of it. I don't know how else to tell you. If you are listening to this on a phone, Congo is already in your pocket. If you are watching on a screen, it is beneath your fingertips. If you drive an electric car, the story of Congo sits quietly beneath your feet. Congo is not a distant crisis. Please don't tell yourself that. It is woven into the fabric of our modern world. You know, the global infrastructure that powers our daily lives, the so-called sense of connectivity. Whether you like it or not, Congo's weight is on all of us. We carry its burden without knowing. We benefit from its wounds without asking. We scroll through social media, stream videos, charge devices, while children in Katanga, are asleep in dust, coughing from toxic fumes, exhausted by the mines they entered before dawn. This is a call to guilt. It's a call to truth. We live in a world, connected in everything but responsibility. We live in a world that wants to claim progress as speed, but not memory. We know how to sync thousands of devices, but we don't know how to sync our conscience to justice. But what if we change that? What if we change that? What if we paused before upgrading? What if we demanded more from tech companies than just innovations? What if they value children's lives? What if they value children's life above batteries? We must begin with recognition that Congo is bleeding, not from chaos, but design. That its plunder continues because the world refuses to reckon with what it has stolen. What it has stolen from these people. We must continue with anger, not empty rage, but sharp, necessary fury. We must continue with anger, not empty rage, but sharp, necessary fury, insisting that the suffering of black children is not an acceptable cost or comfort. We must act with voices, votes, wallets, platform, arts, research, and resistance. Silence has never saved anyone. Looking away has never healed a wound. They say history repeats itself, but that's not quite true. History doesn't repeat itself. It continues until someone stops it. Let us be the ones who stop it. Let us say, not in my name, not with my silence, not anymore. Let us carry Congo, not as a shame, but as a duty that ought to be told. Because once you know the truth, you cannot unknow it. Once you hear the scream beneath your screen, you cannot pretend the world is fine. You cannot pretend things are going well and things are moving fine. Remember, Congo is bleeding, but so is your phone. And it is time to do something about it. It is time to look at it squarely, now into the future, now and forever, now into times not yet given to us or granted access to us. I am Biringkpa. I am your brother, the mendicant, strolling this world with you. See you next time. If you do like this video, please drop a comment, like the video, share with your family members, share with those you care about, drop somebody you want me to talk to, drop a particular research you want me to do or want me to talk about. Let's continue these conversations. Let's continue these boring conversations. See you next time.